Hello and welcome to AI and Tax Practice, Practical Workflows from Tax Research to Tax Court. I'm Philip Behrens, Chair of the BHBA Taxation Law Section. The tax section is sponsored by Hochman Salk Toscher Press PC. The Hochman Salk Toscher Press PC advantage is experience, an eye for innovation, and genuine dedication to clients, their families, and their business. In addition to their national practice in civil tax and criminal tax controversy, related litigation in federal and state courts, the firm is also active and successful in handling other non-tax white-collar investigations and prosecutions. And I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. We have many AI presentations in the past, including privilege and work product protection. But Stephen is a repeated participant in these presentations and with fantastic input. So I'm very delighted to have him here today to speak about the use of AI in tax. Steve is the founder of Intelligence by Intent. He has trained more than 3,000 attorneys across 50 plus law firms and bar associations on the effective use of AI tools, and is a frequent speaker at the Beverly Hills Bar Association and legal industry conferences, including the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Steve brings more than 25 years of executive leadership experience, including CFO and SVP roles in technology companies, along with a Wharton MBA. And now, let's get started. Steve, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Philip. Thank you for having me back. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I'm not going to put it into presentation mode because I'm going to bounce back and forth between slides and real world examples. So I have the chat open in the background, and if people have questions, please put it in there. I would love to make this interactive. The more questions, the better. And I'm happy to talk about things, anything related to AI, especially as we get toward the end of this. So with that, let me jump in. I know we've got about an hour, and I've got what I hope will be a really interesting presentation for you. So just briefly, Philip introduced me. Who am I? I spent the last several years just working with law firms and helping law firms and lawyers really understand what AI is, what AI can do for you, how you can change process, and all the ways that a firm can really leverage it, right? I've been a keynote speaker at a bunch of different events. I've got 25 years of experience in executive leadership roles. I've got a Wharton MBA, and I live here in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to connect online and offline with people as we talk about this. So the way I like to start out these presentations is I like to ask a question. And I know not everybody's on video, so I can't actually see everybody, but I like to ask people, when is the last time that you spent 3 hours on something that AI can now do in 3 minutes, right? And it's not to mean that every task, that used to take 3 hours now takes 3 minutes. But the point is, these tools are such productivity enhancers. It allows us to do so much more at such a higher quality when we learn how to actually use these tools. And so I like to use this quote from Scott Clopert, and Scott has used Claude and ChatGPT and tried all the tools. And he and his firm is one of the first folks I worked with a couple of years ago. And this is one of the only times I'll actually read, basically what's on the entire slide. But Scott's view is ChatGPT is so essential to every activity that I do all day long. The only way I would stop using it is if they pried it from my cold, dead hands. And I suspect that as you really start to understand and use these tools, you will start to feel the same way. I hope you start to feel the same way. They are an absolute game changer for what we can do here. So the agenda today, we're going to cover 5 things. There's a little bit of introduction, and I do not go very technical for those of you that have seen me present before, but there are a couple of core AI concepts that every law firm leader should understand. Then I want to spend a minute talking about privacy and data protection across, consumer, team, and enterprise plans. This is a really big deal. I saw more news today around, an attorney that got sanctioned because there were fake citations, fake quotes in, a document that went in front of the judge. Obviously, we don't want to have that happening. We want to make sure that what you're doing is protected, right? Then we're going to spend the bulk of the time doing practical use cases and live demonstrations. And the vast majority of these are around tax practice areas. So I hope you'll find them very useful. And as I'll show you at the end, all of the prompts that I use in here, I'm happy to share with people as well, because I think they're very useful, especially if you're first learning how to use these tools. Then I'll spend a few minutes talking about some prompting frameworks, so how you get better output out of these tools. These tools have changed dramatically in the last couple of years and really even the last 6 to 9 months. And they have the ability to do things now that they just couldn't do, even 6 months ago in terms of prompting and things like that. And then finally, I'll end with a couple of closing thoughts. So with that, let me jump in here. So let's start by talking about, again, some core AI concepts that I think everybody should know. And one of the things I want to start with is that there are different ways of using AI, right? And most people don't step back and really think about this. But I basically have, identified 5 ways that I and different clients have worked with these different AI models. And most people start on the left and they progressively work their way to the right. And you actually get more and more value out of these tools as you work to the right. So the first one really is, I call ask, right? Ask a question, get an answer. For many people, this was a simple replacement for Google. Hey, tell me about this tax law change. What are the implications for this client, right? It's relatively simple. And these tools are incredibly, incredibly powerful when it comes to things like that. The next area is drafting. You're working on a tax memo, you're working on a response to an audit request, and these tools, you may start working on the draft. You may ask, Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini to work on the draft with you, but they've become incredibly powerful at drafting, at editing, and changing. Where I've started to personally see the really big unlock for a lot of organizations is what I call the co-work phase. So Claude launched something called Co-work a little while ago, where Claude can now operate on tens, hundreds, thousands of documents on your computer. It can take action on your behalf. It can basically act as an agent, follow your instructions and do things, read documents, create summaries, create spreadsheets, create presentations, revise things, edit Word documents or track changes through simple commands. It is really unlocking things. And I'll show you an example later today, how you can analyze, 100 financial files, categorize them, put Bates numbers on them, all sorts of things. So you'll get an idea of some of the things that you can do. The next phase up then is delegation, where if you started using co-work and these agentic tools, you can actually start creating agents out there to go act on your behalf and do things, right? Monitor when laws change and give you automated summaries, right? Monitor your trial calendar, monitor your email, and actually have it take actions and brief you and do things. And the furthest stage 5 is orchestrate. And this is where people are going to be managing entire fleets of agents, right? We're still a long way from that. A couple of the largest enterprises are getting there. But where the real value I'm seeing today, most firms today are in stages 1 and stage 2. And I was just working with a firm earlier today on stage 3 to redefine, client intake process and document process. So as we go through this, you'll see different examples of really stage 1, 2, and 3 here, and they are incredibly useful. But there are 2 terms that I really want you to be aware of, right? The first one is context window, and the second one, a really important one, is hallucinations. So let's talk about context window. A context window is effectively an AI's short-term memory in the sense of, how long of a conversation can you have with an AI before it forgets what you're doing, right? If you've used these tools to any extent, if you've uploaded files into them, you know that there's only a certain length of conversation you can have before it either cuts you off or it starts to dramatically forget things, right? So effectively what happens is for most of these tools, it has a rolling window. And all the things that you filled up in the beginning, as you keep going and having longer and longer conversations, it remembers the bottom part of the conversation. But once you reach that limit, it forgets about the top part, right? So some of the initial guidance, some of the, the things you've uploaded, it just won't have context there. So you need to be aware that when you use these tools, that there are limits, right? And the analogy that I like to use for people is imagine you've got a large desk space or a large conference table in a conference room. You can cover it with so many pieces of paper that you can actually see at one time. But once you fill that up, right, you have to start covering things up, right? That's the early memories that it starts to forget. And the different tools out there have different context lengths. And the AI companies measure context windows in the sense of tokens. I don't think that's particularly useful. I would rather talk about it in terms of words or pages, right? And so if you're using the latest models of ChatGPT 5.5, right, their context window in words is roughly 192,000 words or, just under 800 pages of content, right? So when you look at the uploads you do, if you're uploading PDF files and briefs and memos, and declarations and depositions and spreadsheets, right? That all takes context. So you can collectively have, roughly an 800-page conversation before it forgets things. Now, I typically tell people don't go on that far, right? That's not a great thing to do, but, you can just know that it can go that big. The latest versions of Claude, the newest one is Opus 4.8, which launched about a week ago, right? Has about 150,000 words or about 600 pages. However, if you are using Claude in a tool that I'll show you later called Cowork, it actually has a 1 million token context window. So just like Gemini, you can actually have it access up to about 3,000 pages. So there are different ways to access longer term models, and they're all doing a better job, and they're all extending their context window lengths. So these have improved dramatically. 2 years ago, this was 16,000, 32,000, sometimes 64,000, and now most of the state of the art models are pushing a million or more. Some models have even reached 2 million. So the other concept I just want to mention is called hallucinations. And you've probably heard this term, and if you've used these tools before, you will know that a hallucination is when an AI model confidently makes something up and tells you in complete confidence that something is true when it is absolutely 100% not true. And the best analogy I can give you is, imagine you've hired someone who is brilliant, well-read, extremely articulate. They have one tragic flaw. They just can't say, I don't know. So when these models were first trained, right, they were trained to please us, to give us an answer. And even if it couldn't get an answer, it tried to come up with the best answer it could. So it would make things up. Now, the tools hallucinate way, way less today than they used to. And especially when you're using the most advanced tools, if you're using the brand new Opus 4.8 model from Claude, it has, one of the highest honesty factors, one of the lowest hallucination factors. So they're doing an incredible job of actually telling you, no, I don't know the answer to that, or this answer isn't completely accurate. However, they can still make mistakes. So one of the big takeaways, and I'll talk about this in a slide later, is if there's one thing and one thing only you take away from this presentation today, is please remember that you have to do human legal review after anything that comes out of these AI tools, right? It's your name, it's your bar number, it's your malpractice insurance, things like that. So please, 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 even though you will get great answers, great insights, and it can do an incredible amount of work, you still have to do human review on this stuff. So one thing I want to mention briefly is intelligence levels. And the intelligence levels on these tools is astonishing. And a year ago, right, we were back in this zone back here where the best models in the world could answer, roughly 25% of PhD level questions. So this is a single benchmark, and there's tons of them out there on coding and legal benchmarks and other things. This is an amalgamation of a bunch of different benchmarks. And the expectation is these are some of the hardest problems in the world that aren't easily trained on. So the average human person would score near zero, right? Specialists in their fields would be able to answer a lot of the PhD level questions. The best models in the world now, so the highest ranked one is Claude Opus 4.8 on max thinking. It can now answer 61% of PhD level questions across, science and math and chemistry and biology and coding and reasoning. When you look at the evolution, this has gotten great. There is an even more advanced model called Mythos that they're releasing sometime in the next couple of weeks, which will jump this again. But just know that these tools, if you started using these tools a year ago or 2 years ago, they were good. They weren't that bright. Now they are incredibly articulate. They are incredibly bright. So what I want to do is I like to weave demonstrations in here because my view is, hey, it's always more interesting to see what these tools can do, what these tools can look like. So as I said, I built a bunch of examples in here and we'll go through these, and I've pre-built the answers to some of these, but I'll also launch them real time so you can see how the tools work. So this first one is if you're dealing with, a multi-state nexus and filing obligation, right? Since the South Dakota versus Wayfair 2018 ruling, right, state tax rules have multiplied. A growing company will frequently find itself in these challenges. So again, I don't want to read everything on the slide, but you've got to deal with income and franchise tax issues under a bunch of different states. You've got different local tax obligations, gross receipt taxes, business and occupation taxes, city taxes, right? Employee from work, home, anywhere arrangements, creating payroll, income and corporate income tax issues. So let's say you've got a company that has, anywhere from, they've grown from 1 to 30 states, and they may have a large tax footprint that is invisible to their normal tax folks. So how can you have AI do this, right? So, Claude can take the company's profile, its state-by-state revenues, all the transaction counts, its employee and contractor footprint, its activities, and produce a state-by-state tax map table that does the following things, right? It creates a sales tax economic nexus statute, status per state, income and franchise tax per state, right? All these different things that you can do here. And so what I've done, if I open up my browser here, and I've created a detailed sense of examples and a detailed sense of prompts. And so this is the prompt, and I'll make this a little bit bigger here so you can see it, right? And I'll talk about strategies and prompting at the end, but this is, hey, you're a state and local tax counsel for the client describing the attached materials. I've given you this information, a company profile describing the business model, customer base activities, state revenue and presence table for 2024 and 2025, the company's historical filing position by state, right? Today, when I ran this was May 26, don't use M dashes. Here's what I want you to do, Claude, right? Or ChatGPT or Gemini, right? Part one, I want you to do a sales tax nexus analysis, right? For every state where the company has sales, determine whether there's an economic nexus is established, right? Go do this. Part two, I want you to do income and franchise tax nexus analysis, right? Part three, the PL 86272 application, right? Go through that. Local and gross tax receipts, employer and contractor footprint, back tax exposures, all these different things. So one of the things that you can have at the end, so on the last page of this presentation is my email. If you'd like a copy of these prompts, because I think these are useful and they're great ways for people to learn, shoot me an email. I will happily share the doc out with you. It's an easy way to jumpstart this. But if I grab this prompt and if I go open a new section of Claude here, I'm going to use their highest level model. I'm going to paste the prompt in. I'm going to go add some files in that I've created here. In fact, I'm just going to drag them in from across the screen because I have this information here. Let me drop those in here, right? It will load those up and I'm going to go ahead and say go. And so it's going to go off and running. Now it can take a few minutes to run these different examples. So what I'm going to do is I've actually pre-done these so I can show you what the output looks like. And we can always go back and see what it is. But for purposes of speed and covering all the content, I want you to be able to see, what these tools can do. So you'll see here, I literally pasted in the same prompt. I uploaded the same files. It worked through it systematically. It searched the web. It checked available skills. It looked at different things. And at the end of the day, it says, here's the core problem. Lattimore collects sales in 11 states, but has sales tax nexus, in roughly 43, files income tax in only 2 states, supplied employees, inventory, and reps spread across many more, locations. So at the end, it does the full analysis, and then it creates this detailed document. And one of the things that's great about Claude, and by the way, you can have ChatGPT do this too, and actually Google's Gemini can now do this, is you can actually create Word documents. And Claude does it natively. It just almost automatically. So it's great. So based on what I asked it to do, it went through and created this, this multi-state nexus and filing obligation map. I'll just show you what's in here, the table of contents, right? Scope assumptions and limitations, right? An executive summary that's in here. And by the way, the table of contents is empty here. It's one of those dynamic fields where if I opened up the Word document, it would actually pre-populate it based on this, but I'm just showing it to you in Claude here. So here's the executive summary about what happened, right? Headline figures, sales tax, back exposure, all these different things, this, the sales tax nexus analysis. So a detailed, plan by state, what the issues are, what the status is, right? Goes through all the different states that they're in. Conclusions for sales tax. What do we have there, right? Income franchise tax nexus analysis, right? Here's the framework. Here's the state issues. Again, I'm not going to go through this. And if you wanted some of this output in the prompts, the samples, I'm happy to share that to you too. But I just want to show you the level of output that these tools can now generate. And one of the things that's great, let me come back here for a second. A year ago, you could not have put a prompt in this long with this much detail and gotten it to follow all the steps and do the instructions. These tools, really Claude and ChatGPT now, are absolutely fantastic at following all the steps you can do here. So again, a really good example of how this can work and what this can do. So it's off running, right? This other one, you can see it's processing. We'll let it run in the background, but I want to keep going just given time and what we're doing. So privacy and data protection, I'm going to make this section really brief. So super important, right? There's been lots of rulings about this. I know the bar associations all across different states are issuing guidelines. Please, please, please don't use consumer grade AI tools, right? You are under consumer terms of service. Even though you can technically turn off training, depending on situations, other people can access the data in there. The data stays for a long time. There's never BAA or HIPAA availability in there. So please don't use those. You're risking privilege and you're risking a lot of issues, right? Use commercial grade accounts, use Teams accounts, use enterprise accounts. It does not train on your data. You are commercially, they are commercially contracted not to do that. You have much more control over retention policy. On enterprise plans, you can get BAAs and HIPAA compliance, and you can talk to your clients that, hey, you're only using commercial grade tools that don't train. About 6 weeks ago, I went through all the latest tools and actually created a large update on this here. where I went through, again, the consumer grade tools, all of the commercial grade tools, right? Because there's teams, education, enterprise. I put a little bit of the pricing in there. I talk about the pros and cons of all those, but this is a single page snapshot from Claude. In this document, which by the way is down here and it's in the handout, it has ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, Perplexity. And again, it tells you which ones you can and cannot use. And it talks about some of the key certifications that give you that confidence that you can confidently use these tools with client data and things like that. So super, super important. All right, let's look at another example. You get a CP2000 notice, right? And you want to think about getting a draft response, right? So it's CP2000 notice arrives proposing additional tax based on third-party reporting that the IRS automated underreporter function match against the return. You're going to have to go through, read the notice carefully, tie each proposed item back to the taxpayer's records, determine all these different things. So again, how can Claude or ChatGPT help you, right? It can literally help you do an item by item reconciliation of each AUR proposed adjustment against the taxpayer's records, right? You can have it create a clear agree, disagree, partially disagree recommendation in here. So again, I will show you the prompt that's in here. If we go to number 2 here, right? Again, I give it guidance about, what you are, what your role is. Then I tell it, what do I want it to do? And this is really important. So the more specificity you can give these AI tools, the better the answer you're going to get. So I'm telling it, I want an item by item reconciliation table, right? I want a legal and factual analysis for each item where we recommend disagree or partially agree, and give me a paragraph explaining the position, right? Cite all the relevant IRS codes, regulations, or published guidance on this, right? Where the IRS might have missed an offsetting item, for example, on basis on a sold security, whatever it happens to be. You can see the more detailed prompt here. So again, I'm not going to run it live. I'm going to go back to the project here, and I'll just show you what the output looks like. Because again, it's really useful because again, these things take a little bit of a while to run. I'm going to open it up in Word format here. And by the way, if you want the output to be in an Excel file, tell it to be in an Excel file. If you want it to be in a PDF, you can tell it to be in a PDF. It's very easy to have the content and to go get this stuff and make this stuff happen, right? So here's my CPT 2000 analysis and draft response. So it went through, item by item reconciliation, right? The wages, okay, agree, no changes proposed, matches return, agree, partially agree, right? Proceeds correct, but the basis ignored, a correct net gain, not gross proceeds, right? Disagree. And then you'll see it goes down and it looks at all the different things, right? So for all the things where we partially disagree, I asked it to say, hey, the taxpayer did emit Schedule D, so the gain is genuinely unreported, right? However, the AUR unit treated the entire as gross proceeds as a gain because the broker reported the lots as uncovered. And again, it just goes through, gives you all the details. I'm not trying to read all this up, but I want to show you the power of what these tools can do. And you, by the way, you could get a very similar output from, the most advanced models in ChatGPT, if that's your tool, or if you're using Copilot, using some of the more advanced models in there. You can also have it create a draft response letter, which I asked it to do, right? Here it's addressed to Margaret Holloway, the Internal Revenue Service, RE, here's a taxpayer ID, all the information to the automated underreporter unit, right? Here's the information, here's a summary, here's my explanation. So again, I would never turn this in without you doing human review on it, double checking, making sure that it's accurate. But to jumpstart, to do that analysis, to help you, these tools are, as you can see, incredibly powerful.
And Steve,
Yeah,
that might be a good time for a question.
sure.
The first question is, how do you check to make sure everything is right? Wouldn't you have to check the statute in every state, the information for the company in every state, etc.? Or do you just spot check to see if some samples are correct? In other words, how do we exercise the human check?
Yeah, it really depends on, for a lot of people, like, if you knew the client, if you knew the financials, right, you'd be able to sort of mentally know if you'd prepared that return about, like probably what was right and what was wrong. What I typically do is, and this is my own best practice, is I will actually run the exact same scenario through 2 models, right? I will actually take, and this is something that I've learned over time and it catches almost all the errors. I will actually run this analysis through, say, Claude Opus 4.8, and I'll run the same analysis through, ChatGPT 5.5. And if I'm getting the same results, I'm pretty confident, and then I will go spot check it. But I would also go spot check. The areas where we run into the biggest issues often are if it's, citing different cases and regulations. You should always go check those to double check, right? If you've got a Westlaw subscription or something else, you can actually upload the brief back into there and have it help you spot check. So there are ways to use the tools to do that. But it's if you were being the most thorough, yes, you should check everything. But the reality is, if you run it through two independent tools and they come up with exactly the same answer, chances are it's pretty accurate. And I would go double check where, if there's any inconsistencies. That would be the approach that I would take.
And how detailed financial data are you giving it to get quality results, or what I see privacy protections?
I'm sorry, say that again, Philip.
So one, how detailed is the financial data that you are giving it to get a quality result? And what are
Oh,
the privacy protections?
sure. So I'm actually giving it actual tax returns, W-2s, bank statements, things like that, brokerage statements. I've uploaded all those, in different examples. And this is why I said if I just go back to this privacy page go back to this page, I would never ever upload mine or anyone else's financial documents into a consumer grade account. Even if you're paying the $200 a month for Claude or ChatGPT and you've turned off training, right, which you can do, that is still a horribly bad idea because third parties can access that data, and that would be a breach of, your privilege and your rights to the clients. If you are using consumer commercial grade accounts, the teams or business accounts or the enterprise accounts, it does not train on your data. It cannot. You have the right to go delete data. You can create, how long it keeps it and things like that. So you can confidently upload that stuff into there, right? I mean, it's the same thing as if you're using Harvey or something like that. You're using the commercial grade versions of the accounts. So as long as you're doing that, I mean, look, if you want to redact stuff, you can redact stuff, but they will not train on your data. No third party person can access it. So that's the approach that I would take there. So let me go through a couple of other examples. I know we're almost at the top of the hour, and this is where I want to spend the bulk of the time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come back to a couple of more of these tax examples because I want to show you a few other ones first, and then I'll come back to this one because I think these get really interesting. And so one of the things that these tools are great at are extracting key metrics from financial statements. So if you're uploading a 10K or a firm's financial statements or things like that, and you want it to go do something, right? It can actually easily extract out, income statements, balance sheets, statements of cash flows, from any kind of filing you give it, right? So I'm going to give it an Apple 10K filing, and I'm going to ask it the following. I'm going to say, hey, look, you're an AI assistant tasked with extracting key financial metrics from a company's 10K filing. I want you to identify and extract the following metrics for the past 3 years, right? EBITDA, revenue growth rate, net income, debt to equity ratio, free cash flow. Locate the sections, right? Extract the specified metrics. And importantly, if a metric isn't explicitly stated, calculate it where possible, right? So in this case, EBITDA is operating income plus depreciation and amortization. Present the results in a table, add a brief summary. I'm going to just go grab this prompt just like this here. I'm going to go open up a new chat in Claude. I'm going to switch the model because I'm going to work on a little bit of a faster model here. We'll do high reasoning here. I'm going to paste in this prompt. I'm also going to tell it, put the output in an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go add this 10K right now. So I'm grabbing Apple's 10K document from, I think, 2 years ago. So it's pretty detailed. And I'm going to go ahead and say and go. And I'm actually going to do the same thing for a second in ChatGPT, just so you can see, the results of this across a different tool here. Let me go grab this here. And by the way, let me make sure. Yeah, I just grabbed one there. Okay, so it's off and running. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say, put the results in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and say go. I don't need heavy thinking for this. This is not nearly that important of a task to go do. And so I'm going to go off and let these things run. So while these are running, because they will take a minute, I'm going to go to the next one and talk about it. And we'll run those and we'll be able to go back to these and take a look at this stuff. Another one of these things that these tools are amazing at is analyzing charts. So you may have had a chart again out of someone's financials or out of an article or something somebody sent you, and you want to understand what are the key trends of that chart, right? So here is a chart of the streaming music industry, right? It talks about, the sort of what happened in physical, music records and LPs, right? We had downloads that showed up, we had others, and we have streaming, right? We had some major events here. But you can actually take an image like this and dump it in there. I'm going to make this really simple. I'm just going to tell it, look, you're an AI assistant writing a description for a revenue trend chart, summarize the trends you see and highlight the key points, write a description of that chart. So I will just go open up a new window again. I'm going to go grab, let me just go grab this, this music chart here. I'm going to paste this in here. I'll go ahead and launch this. I will again do it in ChatGPT. I also always think it's just, like I said, useful to see things in different areas. And I'm also going to go run this in Gemini. So for those of you that might be using Gemini, I'm going to actually run it in their 3.5 model. And let me go grab this chart here, and we'll drop that in there. So if we go back now, all right, so it's still working on that 10K filing. This one's still working too. So they're taking their time today. But this is already done though with the chart, right? So Claude's already done. It says you shared a statistic chart, right? What it shows. The stacked area chart shows streaming devices by industry goes to new highs, right? Displaying global recorded music revenues broken down by segment with peak value in $28.6 billion. To complete, I pasted in the wrong prompt. Huh, sorry. No wonder this is going to be slow. Hold on a sec, guys. This was on me. I was doing too many things at once. Let's go back to here. Let's go, let's cancel that one. Let's cancel this one. Let's try this again. That was pretty silly. So let me go grab the chart. This is the downside of doing several examples at one time. Let's drop this in here. Now let's go here. Great. That's the right prompt. So now we'll go do it ChatGPT. We'll grab the chart. We'll paste the prompt in, and we'll do Gemini. Grab the chart, paste the prompt in, and we'll say go. And that'll take a minute to go. All right. So if we go back to the first example now, so this was the extraction from the Apple Financial. So this read the entire, I think it's a 100-page 10K, right? You can see it extracted out here. Here are the key financial metrics I asked about, that it wanted to pull out of here, key financials, all these different things. It calculated EBITDA for me, which wasn't in there. And you can see here it's calculated, and did EBITDA by revenue. Here's some trend summary analysis stuff, right? Revenue grew from 394 billion to 383 billion, right? It went down and then recovered to 391 billion. So you can ask it for insights. You can ask it for financial analysis. You can ask it to go do these things, right? ChatGPT is still crunching through this stuff. So let's see if this is done with a chart. Here we go. This is much better. So it read the chart, talked about the global recorded music revenue industry, right? The trends, physical revenue, a long decline, downloads, there was a rise and fall of downloads. Streaming has been the engine of recovery. And in fact, music is now a larger industry than it was, than in the beginning of the days, right? ChatGPT does the same thing. Gemini goes through here and does the same thing, and it actually, ChatGPT or Gemini actually did a very, very detailed version of this thing, right? It actually pulled out a lot of data. And one of the things that's really interesting about these tools is, let's say that someone had given you a chart here and you really wanted the underlying numbers from this chart. You could actually upload these numbers or upload this chart into Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini and say, hey, I don't have the underlying source numbers. Can you actually create an Excel file for me that would allow me to recreate this chart? Do your best job to estimate the underlying numbers at each key point in this chart. And it can actually go do that. So if you have to reconstruct things, it's really useful. Another good example, importing tax return information. This goes to the question we had earlier, right? These tools are amazing at pulling out tax information and doing these things. So I'm going to tell it, look, I want you to go pull out, critical tax data from this 1120 form. I want you to do it for each of the files 1 year at a time. So if I had multiple years of files, I could actually, upload 3, 5, 10 years of tax returns, and I could tell it to put it in, the same spreadsheet, column by column. I could have it do on different tabs, whatever you want to do. And I'm going to give it a format that I want, right? I want you to be like 2020 form 1120 line 1A gross receipts, go like this. So again, I'm going to go like this. I'll just launch a new term. I'm going to drop in a fictitious tax return here. I'm going to say, put the output in Excel file. We'll do this one again here. And I'll just do ChatGPT again really quickly. And again, just so you can see these, and this will be the last one where I do multiple demos on things, but let me, I dropped that in there. Let me paste this in here. I won't tell it Excel. We'll let it run. We'll let that go for a minute. While that's doing that, I'm going to switch out of slides for a second to show you something else. So one of the tools that is fantastic, if you happen to be using Claude, is Claude created something called add-ins. And there's an add-in for Microsoft Word, for Microsoft Excel, and for Microsoft PowerPoint. And so if I go open up my Microsoft Word here, and I'm going to show two things. So I'm going to show one screen, then another. So one of the things that they've added is, if let's say you have a tax document here, right? Article 8 tax matters. We've got a bunch of different things here. And, this is an excerpt from a stock purchase agreement. There's up here, you'll see I have a button called Claude. in Claude here, when I open this up, allows me to basically now interact with this document and do things just as if I had uploaded it into Claude itself, right? There are a couple differences I'll talk about. But if I had a really long prompt, I'm going to paste this in here for a second. I'm going to say, say to it, hey, review this Article 8, tax matters from the seller's perspective and revise it as a substantive red line, with all edits as track changes. Specifically in Section 8.1, broaden the definition of taxes. In Section 8.2, do this. In Section 8.3, do this. So, I've read this document. I wanted to go through and make these changes for me and do these things. And so one of the great things about this particular tool is it has, assuming you're using it through your, your Teams or your enterprise subscription, it has all the same confidentiality and protection as if you were going through, as if you had uploaded into Claude directly. So I don't want to run it. It takes a few minutes to run, but I'll show you what the output looks like because I pre-ran this earlier so you can get a sense of this. And so if I go look at this, again, I had prompted this exact same thing in here. It's the exact same article. If I go back to the top, I said, review this article, use track changes, right? Go through this, do all these things. It read it. And then it asked me, here's all the things I find. You want me to apply these changes? So you can actually make this very interactive. It won't just do everything for you. It will actually go do all this stuff. And you'll see here, because I'm in Microsoft Word, it put in my name, hey, Steve Smith. I deleted these things. I changed these things. As I go through, you can actually see it happening. So it's a great way to leverage the power of what, Claude's model can do to drive real amazing change in these tools. And one thing I want to highlight, if you are using the tool this way, is you'll see here it has my name. For example, it has Steve Smith. I could have done this exact same exercise actually in Claude itself. But the one thing that would happen is it would actually show the track changes being from Claude, not from Steve Smith. And so obviously, if I was ever doing something and wanted to send it out to someone, I would probably want to have my name on it, not somebody else's name on it. So this is done. It created a CSV file. Let's just see if if Claude did it. So you can see here, Claude extracted all the tax information, right? It put it in the exact format that I want. It grabbed every single field, every single line, and I've now got a detailed spreadsheet that I could go use with other things. And if I had had multiple years, I could have it go grab multiple years, put it in multiple columns, do things like that. A couple of other things, because I want to get back to the tax returns. I'll just show you a few things. It's great at extracting key information out of documents and creating charts. So this is an example. I won't run this one unless we have some more time at the end. But let's say I had a series of, in this case, credit card transactions. I wanted to go out and identify all the transactions, get me some insights, and create me interactive charts. Claude is fantastic at the ability to create interactive charts and dashboards, as is ChatGPT, by the way, as is Gemini. They're really good. But there's one interactive demo I want to show you before I go back to the specific tax ones, and then we'll hit a couple other things. So one of the things, as I said, when I talked about stage 3, is the ability for these tools to start taking actions for you, right? And so this is an example I use with a lot of family law clients, and I know there are probably similar examples in tax law, where you get a bunch of documents in, you need to identify those documents, figure out what they are, rename them, putting in a particular structure, do things. So in this particular example, I'm going to use Claude Cowork, and I'm going to say, hey, I want you to rename and categorize all these documents. So I'm going to point you to a directory of 100 documents. I want you to analyze every one of those files. I want you to identify what it is, the document type, the date, the vendor. Is it a bank statement? Is it a credit card statement? Is it a tax return? Is this an American Express bill? Is it a Visa bill, right? What happens to it? I want you to create a new subdirectory on my computer called categorize. I'm going to rename it using these formats. Once that's done, I want to turn all these things into Bates numbers, right? Here's the prefix I want to use. Here's the starting number. Everything should be different. And when you're all done with this, create some new files, make it a PDF, which I care about because these are text files, and then create an index log file, as a Word document for me. So I'm literally going to grab this prompt. I'm going to grab this here. I'm going to share my Cowork because that's actually a separate desktop application. I'm going to stop this for a second because this, again, is a really powerful tool. You can do similar things with ChatGPT, but you'd have to use their Codex tool, which is a little more complicated. So I'm going to say work in a project. I'm going to go choose a different folder here. I'm going to go grab my tax one over here. We're going to say financial statements. We'll grab this. I'm going to allow it. I'm going to use Sonnet 4.6. I'm going to paste this in just as is, and I'm going to say go. And this is going to, it's going to read these instructions. It's going to read the files. It'll take a second to start reading a couple of things. It's going to ask me a couple of questions, right? So it's looking at the tools. And what you'll see here is if you've ever used this tool, it's going to create a series of steps here. So right now it's inventorying the files in the financial statements folder. It's going to copy and rename the files into a categorized directory. It's going to add base number. So it's looking at my instructions saying, hey, here's all the things that I'm going to have to go do step by step. I'm going to look at these things. I'm going to add the Bates numbers. Then I'm going to generate a Bates index log for me, right? So I don't have to open all these things up. I don't have to go do these things. And the nice thing is, if you got shared drives, so for example, Microsoft Copilot now has a version of this called Copilot Cowork if you are a Copilot firm, and you can actually point it at, your secured SharePoint and OneDrive stuff if you're working there, or if you use Box or, Dropbox, you can point it at different directories. The nice thing is, it will ask permission. It will do things. I mean, you hopefully saw when I first launched it that it actually asked me for permission to operate on this directory. So you can see here, it found 100 files, 5 tax documents, 47 bank statements, right, from Wells Fargo, US Bank, Bank of America, 48 credit card statements, Visa, MasterCard, Amex. So now it's writing a script to go categorize that stuff. So it can actually write code, open programs. If I given it permission to browse the web, it could open up a Chrome browser and browse things. It is a really powerful tool to go off and do this stuff. I'll let it go 30 more seconds. If it doesn't get done, I'll go back to the presentation, then we'll come back in a second. But Cowork is one of the things that lets you do just amazing, amazing things on it, right? So it's going through, it's actually applying the Bates numbers right now. So this will operate pretty quickly. This actually runs really, really fast. Oh, it's done with that. Now it's generating my Bates index. So this will be done in a couple of seconds here, and you can see the output. So progress 4.4, it's finishing up, and it'll give me a summary. So here we go. So it actually, it opened up all those files. It did all those things. And then it created, this nice Word document for me. Here's the new file name. Here's the starting Bates number. Here's the ending Bates number, right? If I did all these things, each one of these was one page. And if I opened up the directory, on here, in fact, I will show it just to show you what it did here, just so you can see it, because I think that seeing things makes it really powerful. I will share this. So this is my Finder window here. It was in this financial statements. And you'll see here that it actually created, the Bates ones. So here's every document it created. Here was the index, and it turned all these text files into these Bates ones with the PDF. So all those things that I asked it to do, all those things that would take, me or a paralegal or an associate several hours to go through and do, you can now start to automate with these tools and do really, really amazing things. So let me go back to sharing my presentation here. I know we're about 17 minutes left, so I just want to make sure we hit all the important things. So again, a really good example of what it could do there. Let me hit a couple more tax-specific examples just to show you some of the output. So again, say you get, a 450 notice, you're getting an audit response you've got to do, right? So every year the company's external auditor sends each of the company's lawyers an audit inquiry, letter requesting all these things. List of pending and threatened litigation, lawyer's assessment of likely outcomes, a range of loss for any matter that is reasonably possible or probable, confirmation of unpaid legal fees, right? You got to comply all the stuff, do all these things. So how can AI help, right? It can read the audit inquiry letter and create a structured summary of all these things. We can create a response letter, matter by matter disclosures, right? A list of matters that the firm declines to characterize, right? All these different things. So again, a detailed prompt. If I go look at number 3 here, so again, go through, here's the requirements. The response must only address matters which the firm has been engaged and has devoted substantive attention, right? For each pending or threatened matter the firm chooses to describe, do these things. So again, I'm being very, very specific about what I want this tool to do and how you can use it. And if I go back and look, and I'll scroll down, and as I go back and look at the output on this one, if I go back to tax here, this is number 3. We'll open this up. And you'll see here that it has crafted this letter for me, by dated, letter dated January 22nd, 2026, has requested we furnish you the following information, right? Pending or threatened litigation, claims and assessments, things like this, right? Here's all the different things that are going on here. Tax matters related to these different things. So again, it went through unpaid fees, limitations, et cetera, right? So it drafted that nice letter. We could have asked for more content. We could have said, hey, take all the information, put it in a spreadsheet, whatever we wanted to do. It can go off and it can go do all those different things. Say you get a statutory notice of deficiency to tax, right? So the taxpayer receives a statutory notice of deficiency. Counsel has 90 days to file a petition with the U.S. tax court under, that code, miss the deadline by a day and the deficiency is assessed and the taxpayer must, pay first and sue for a refund later, right? So a well-drafted petition does these things, right? Establishes the jurisdiction, identifies each adjustment, preserves every argument that might prove useful. So again, I created a very detailed prompt for this. And as you use these tools and as you learn, look, you will create your own prompts. You you guys are collectively the experts. I am not. These are sample ones, but I'm trying to highlight, what these tools can do and show you the power of ways you can use these and ways you might not have thought about. So we want to have the part one here, do a 90-day calculation, create an issue map, right? Do the tax court petition, designation of place of trial, calendar and next steps. And so again, if I go look at the output of this one, number 4 here, we'll come all the way to the bottom. So here's the petition that it created. And you'll notice it created, 2 documents here. If I had needed Claude to create, 3 or 5 or 10 documents, it would do that. And the nice thing is, as I said, it's creating it in a Word document. And by the way, if you have a templated Word document format that your firm uses that has, your headers and footers and your logo and your letterhead, you can actually upload those into Claude, and you can actually have Claude use your existing templates in your structure. So you can make it, you can save that extra copy paste step. Most people don't realize you can do that. So, here's the amounts in dispute, the assignments of error, all these different things, statement of facts, the prayer for relief, all these things we wanted to do. Here's another document that's the designation of place of trial, right? So again, it can create these things for you as you go through here, right? So here's what we'd like to have it here. Boston, Massachusetts is a place of trial for this case. So the last 2 really quickly, IRS information document request response package. I'll show you the prompt quickly. I'll show you, but if the IRS issues an information document request, right, listing 15 to 30 document categories, what do we have to do? Read it all carefully, map to the documents, review for privilege, work product, all these different things. The prompt for this, again, is right here, where we can go through and, identify all the different things here. We want it to build a complete IDR, an IDR response matrix where I produce a table. We want the privilege log. We want to create a cover letter, production index, action items. So if we go look at what it can do here, if we go look at number 5, if I remember right, this one created quite a bit of things, right? So I asked it to create, a cover letter for me. So let's let it load the cover letter. I'll make this a little bit wider over here so we can see this. So, here's the, from my firm, by secure file transfer, here's the cover letter for what we have. Here's a production in full, production in part, items that may or may not be complete. Here's the end of it. If I go look, then here's the IDR response matrix. And this is an Excel file. And the nice thing is, Claude can create and generate different things, right? So the IRS request summary, an org chart as of 12/31, right? Producing in full, response document number, clarifying note, right? Production in part, we're objecting to these things. So as you go through and you have the different content, you can have the tool help you create, identify, track all these things. And here's the things that are the privilege log. Here's a production index. So again, this isn't meant to replace you. It's meant to help you as a tool to do all these different things. And then here's a set of action items that we have to focus on and continue. And I can't remember if I put timelines in this one or not. Recommended 10 days, follow-up sequence, right? Days 1 to 2, 1 to 3, do these different things to make sure that all these things happen and that nothing falls through the cracks. So again, very useful for doing this stuff. And then the last example in here was, transfer pricing documentation, gap analysis. I'll just show you the output because I want to get to the last couple of slides in the presentation. But if we go here, again, you get the prompt if you want me, but here's another example of how you can create a transfer pricing analysis. Let this go through, right? So here's a transfer pricing documentation gap analysis, right? Headline above it, 10 principal documentation gap analysis, right? Coverage, yes, no, partial coverage, things like that. And again, what you'll find if you use these tools is Claude does a beautiful job of formatting. It actually creates the most highly polished, nicely formatted content of any of the tools out there. But, and this isn't to say I'm endorsing Claude, you can get super highly, competent stuff out of ChatGPT and Gemini. It just doesn't have the same level of polish. You have to spend more time going through and polishing that content. So we went through these different examples. There's a couple other things I want to hit. I want to talk about prompting for a second here because prompting is really important. When you use these tools, think about, bringing a new person on board to your team, thinking about bringing on, a second or third year associate onto your team or a new paralegal. you've got to give them context. You've got to give them instruction, right? They're not going to have all the knowledge that you have about what you're trying to accomplish. So some of the things that I tell people is, and you'll see these in these prompts, right? Be specific and clear, right? Tell the tool exactly what you want. If you're analyzing just one thing, have it focus on that one thing. If you're trying to create an entire workflow like we did here, do all that stuff. Use context and examples, right? Give it insight, give it examples of what you're trying to do. If you have examples of really good content that you've created in the past or guidelines you want to follow, you can upload it. You can do that. This is really important. Break down complex tasks. Like if you saw those prompts I gave you, right? It was like step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, step 4, do this. It will follow these steps and these rules in order, right? Don't try and just throw everything in a single paragraph and make it happen. It's much better if you say step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and obviously those things should build on each other, right? Specify the format you want. You saw that I was telling it to put it in a Word document or put it in an Excel file or put it in a PDF or here's my template, put it in my template, things like that. If you have constraints, right? Use constraints. Hey, only use IRS guidelines from the last 2 years or only use, rulings from this circuit, things like that. It will follow your rulings and your guidelines. And really importantly, just this last one, iterate and refine. What you'll find is you will get a good answer, the first time you ask these tools for something, but the more iteration you do, the more refinement you can do, the better the answer you can get, right? Tell it what was right, what was wrong, how to make it better. It will go do that. This is a structure that I use with organizations when I train firms on how to do prompting. It's called CORE. It's context, objective, role, examples. And if you look at the sample prompts I gave you, a lot of this is in there, but I'll start with role, right? And you saw at the beginning, the role is, hey, who Claude should be? Are you a estate planning attorney? Are you a tax attorney? Are you a paralegal, right? What is your role? Are you a third-year associate, right? Are you a federal tax expert? Tell Claude what you want it to be, and it will start to think in language that way. It'll start to think that way and do things that way, right? What is the context? What is the situation? Hey, this is a letter we got from the IRS. Here's about my client. Here's what we're trying to do. The more background information you can give Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, the better off you're going to be, right? Then importantly, what is the objective? What do you want, Claude to do? And if I go back into these tools, right, these are my objectives, right? Build this response matrix, right? Build a privilege log, draft a cover letter, create a production index, right? So the more specificity you can give these tools, the better off you're going to be. So I put a couple of examples in here of kind of what I call good prompts versus bad prompts. I'll just read one of these. A bad prompt is research the new partnership audit rules, right? That is candidly a terrible prompt. It's way too generic for a tool. It will do what you tell you, but it's not really specific. You'd be much better off saying, identify Treasury regulations and IRS guidance issued in the past 24 months, addressing the centralized partnership audit regime under BBA, focusing on push-out elections under Section 6226 and implications for tiered partnership structures, right? That is a much better prompt. So I've given you some examples in the content here, and that's really it. Let me get to closing thoughts and leave a few minutes for some questions. So one thing I want to mention, look, these are, I call it the dumbest these tools will ever be for the rest of your life. They are already incredibly smart and they get better every single day. They are good. This is so important, right? And I mentioned this earlier. If you take nothing else away, please remember human review after final AI modification, not before. Before you send anything to a client, before you send anything to a court, you must review it, right? Check for the cases, check citations, double check the math. We talked about that earlier, spot check it or have another LLM check the work for you. Because again, an AI doesn't have a bar number. It can't stand before a judge if there's something fabricated. It doesn't have a reputation. It doesn't have insurance, right? You have all those things. It's your name going on it. Please, please, please. Again, if you remember nothing else, please do that. I mentioned earlier when I talked about privacy and things like that, I publish a free newsletter. You'll see the link on the next page. I write almost every day about law and AI or legal examples or ways that AI can be used with law firms and good examples. Here's one that was called literally AI doesn't have a bar number, you do, right? Google just skipped the chatbot error, what they're doing there, right? Your strategy, on getting AI tools, things like that. So it's completely free. It will always be free. And so it's, the link to that is here. It's just smithsteven.com. If you're looking for help, I help firms a couple different ways. if you're really trying to help your firm understand what AI can do and use real world examples like this, right? I run an executive workshop that's designed for attorneys and paralegals and assistants and admins, right? That runs a couple of hours. If people want training, I do training. And occasionally for a selected few firms, if they're really looking for a bunch of, back end help and support, I will do that too. But I'm pretty selective about working on cases like that just because of bandwidth. If you want to reach out to me, if you want the document prompts, look, here's my email, website, my phone number. I really appreciate the time. Philip, I appreciate you asking me to be here. And with that, we have a few minutes left. So let me just see if there's any more questions.
Fantastic presentation. I can just recommend subscribe to his newsletter. It's very helpful, especially keeps you updated on new AI tools and it keeps you updated on implementations ideas.
Thanks.
So let's use a FIFO method, first in, first out. So when you are so efficient and effective, have you abandoned hourly fees and gone to project billing, success fees, or similar things?
Yeah, I was looking to see if I could see the questions also. I was trying to see if I can.
Yeah, in the Q&A, not the
Oh, hang on.
chat,
Yeah,
the
let me get
Q&A.
in the. Oh, you're right. I'm in the wrong panel. Hold on. Let me get the Q&A panel up. Sorry, I had the other one. Perfect. Let me. This way I can. Um, have so. Oh, is this question aimed at me about me being efficient and effective? Have I been in hourly fees and gone to project billing? So the answer is for a couple of things, yes, right? So I do really two things on a fixed fee basis. I do that workshop is just a fixed fee. It's a standard fee I charge them, whether the client is 3 people or 1,000 people, it's the same fee I charge, right? Because I've delivered the content, I've done the workshop, I tailor it to your firm and your questions. And the only other thing I do on a fixed fee basis is I've had a lot of firms say, hey, we really need help creating an AI governance and policy document. Can you do that? I've already spent so much time doing it. I feel like I would not want to charge someone, extra hours for like tailoring something I've already created. So, I mean, I fixed fee that one, right? I literally charge the equivalent of 1 hour. I mean, I have a standard hourly rate that I charge clients. And so those are the two. And then everything else is ad hoc because I've done so much of this stuff. I want people to take advantage of the things I've learned and the things I've done, and I just help them go do it. So I've abandoned it in some areas, and I'm still focused on others. So let's see. I use Claude and ChatGPT, and then upload both to CoCounsel with instructions to harmonize. Is this safe? Well, first of all, I hope you're using Claude and ChatGPT, Teams or enterprise versions. Because if you're using the consumer one, I would never say it's safe. Please don't do that. Again, I'm just trying to protect everyone's, kind of backsides on this one. There's no downside to uploading something into CoCounsel, right? Like I said, if you're using the Teams or enterprise tools, sharing the information back and forth across those is great. It's a great way to have the thinking really improve. Because what I personally find is when I put in something that's a really complex issue, both of them kind of get like 70 to 80% of the way there. And then when I cross pollinate it, say, hey, I'll say to Claude, here's what ChatGPT answered. Go synthesize this and figure out what you missed. And I'll say the same thing to ChatGPT. And the next iterations I get out of there are fantastic. Same thing on the fact checking side. It's really, really good about that. What are the available AI services for solo practitioners with only one user? I don't need it for two and certainly not five. The only one, it depends. Like if you're a Microsoft shop, right? The only one that I know that would have the same kind of security is you could use Copilot if you're a Microsoft shop. Uh, Google Workspace also allows a one user business license. ChatGPT is a minimum of two, but you're looking at $60 a month, $30 a user, right, to do it. And again, for the security and the privacy stuff, I can't recommend using the consumer ones. But Copilot, if you have Microsoft, because I do have a single Microsoft Copilot one, and I have a single Gemini one. So if you want to use those, you can definitely get those and get the same kind of security and reliability. The other thing I will say is if you use Gemini Business. So, and I don't think this really applies to you guys, but if you ever had to upload, medical documents, if you had, HIPAA compliance requirements, the only, non-enterprise solution you can get like at the business level is Gemini. They can actually allow you to go ahead and do that. Let's see. I understand the value of a well-written prompt. Can you discuss more regarding your process through AI to develop and improve your prompts? Great question. A lot of times what I will do is I will start with a prompt and the outcomes, and then I will throw that into Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, I need a much more detailed and thorough prompt to help me do this, right? So I call it meta prompting. Have the tools teach you how to prompt. So if you say, here's the 3 or 5 things I want to do, here's the questions I'm asking, will you create a detailed prompt that will accomplish this? And also help me find anything that you think I might be missing, right? So when I do general training, I show people how to do that. But that's a great question, and it's a great way to use these tools. Have you compared co-work results against Codex results? What if they differ? How do you trust and why? So co-work and Codex are really kind of two different tools. Co-work, so they're Codex and Claude Code are the most similar tools that they started as the programmer tools, and now they've really moved into the knowledge workspace, and they are great at doing detailed analysis. They're just different approaches. What I personally find is that I can actually get Codex to do much longer running tasks and operate in different things. But I mean, like literally yesterday, I actually had Claude running, Cowork running for 2 hours for me, right, doing different things. So I don't really see a remarkable difference in the output, or I don't trust one more than I trust the other. To be honest, they're both amazing models, and I use them for different things and different features. So if I was going to have it go through and do analysis on 100 different spreadsheets, I just happen to my own personal view is I think that ChatGPT and Codex is slightly stronger on that side. If I was having it reason through documents and synthesizing things, I think Opus is a little bit better on that. So I don't see a huge difference in worrying about the quality of the output. Do you worry about subpoenas on Claude for your facts? Should non-lawyer clients? I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't know, Philip, if you have better clarity on that one.
So it's speculation at that point whether or not, but Guy Fico, the former chief of the IRSCI, gave an interview when he left IRSCI
Mhm.
with tax notes. And one question he was asked if there's some eye into looking through people's chatbot conversation for interesting evidence. And Guy Fico said it might be a couple of years early for that question, but
Yeah.
he has no doubt that they will go that route. So,
So look, the law hasn't been definitively resolved in this stuff yet, right? So one thing I would say is again, please don't use the consumer ones. That's where you have the greatest exposure. And if one of your clients is using, AI to help answer questions, to do stuff, if they're using a consumer grade tool, that's where, like the Hepner case in Southern District of New York that everybody talked about, right? Where the government subpoenaed their stuff and was able to get to it. They were using a consumer grade tool. They didn't have training turned off. There's a lot of issues, right? That's why I tell people use the enterprise ones. If you actually have an enterprise versus a business subscription, you can actually, you can do 0 day retention. You can actually have audit logs. You can say delete every chat after 7 days. So you can actually do a lot of things to protect yourself, but you get commercial grade encryption. It's like using any other cloud service, right? I mean, it's like using Microsoft Cloud Service. Um, I personally don't use Harvey. It's designed for very, very large firms. Most of my clients, to be candid, are small to mid-sized firms. And it's an amazing tool for enterprise orchestration. If you have extraordinarily complex legal workflows and a lot of orchestration across a lot of process steps, I mean, it's a great tool. I personally don't use it just because that's, as a solo practitioner, that's just not my business. Is Claude Pro for a solo practitioner attorney appropriate? Again, I will go back to I don't tell people to use the consumer grade tools. Even the pro one on there, it's still consumer terms of service. If you really want the protections and the encryption, you've got to use a commercial grade tool, which is their Teams one. And the minimum amount of team people you can have on Claude Teams is 5, and the cheapest subscription is $30 a person. So you're looking at 150 a month to use that. Last one, civil litigation subpoenas on pro per folks, for example. I think this goes back to their prior related question where it's just, the things aren't resolved. I mean, if they're using consumer grade tools, I mean, we can't control like what's going to happen with those companies. I'm more worried about you and what your firms do and what your people do. So again, please use those enterprise tools.
and
With that, yeah,
there are already decisions out there whether or not the other party has to turn over these documents. Tremblay was the first one in
yeah,
California, 2024. There are presentations, BHBA, about AI privilege and AI work
yeah,
product. So I would refer you to these. They are way more
yep,
detailed than we have. So
absolutely. Well, Philip, thank you again for having me. I
thank
appreciate the
you.
questions. I appreciate the time. Again, people, please reach out if you have questions. If you want the prompt examples, you shoot me a note. I'll share the Word or the Google Doc with you. And I really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.